Hrant Dink was born in Malatya, Turkey in 1954. He moved to Istanbul with his family at the age of 5. In Istanbul, he and his 2 siblings attended the İncirdibi Elementary School and stayed at the school's camp in Tuzla during the summers. It was at this school that he met his future wife Raquel of the Silopi Armenian Varto tribe. In the 1980s, Hrant Dink and his wife took over the management of the Tuzla Children's Camp, which had served as a second home for them and many other Armenian children. The camp was later seized by the state, part of a broader campaign of extrajudicial expropriation of the property of minority foundations. During this period, Hrant Dink was detained 3 times.
Ellerinden aldı. Bizi oradan attılar. Attıktan sonra en son geçenlerde sizinle de gittik. Gördünüz orayı. Müthiş bir harabeydi. Hiç kimse için kullanmadılar. Yani alıp orayı ne bileyim bir özürlü çocuklar için aynı maksatlı bir iş için kullansalardı. Ya da yetim çocuklar için ya da çocuklar için ya da yaşlılar için ne bileyim yani o yaratılan şey bir devamlılığı olmuş olsaydı, ya bir şey yarasaydı yine bu kadar gam yemeyecekti.
In the 1990s, when the war in Turkey's southeast was at its most intense, Armenians were frequently vilified and subject to racist abuse, despite having no connection to the events. In an effort to combat this widespread hate, a few intellectuals of the Armenian community founded the newspaper Agos in 1996, with Hrant Dink serving as editor-in-chief. The first bilingual newspaper to be published in both Turkish and Armenian, Agos aimed to strengthen the bonds among the diverse elements of the Armenian community whose ties to its mother tongue had grown weak, and to build bridges between the Armenian community and public at large in Turkey by bringing together the concerns and major news items affecting both. Over the years, Hrant Dink wrote and spoke on a wide range of issues, including democratization, identity politics, relations with the European Union, relations with Armenia, cultural heritage, problems in education, and coming to terms with the past. One of the central focuses of his speeches was democratization in Turkey and the creation of a just and equal society.
Yani ben orada yaşamak istiyorum. Orada yaşayacağım, sonuna kadar da orada yaşayacağım. Benim ilacım, her şeyim orası. Ve orada insanlarla kurduğum ilişki. İnanılmaz bir kavga içerisindeyim. Kavgayı da Ermeni olduğum için, Ermeniler için yapmıyorum yani. Ben o Türkiye'nin, bölgemin, insanların oranın da cennet olması için yapıyorum. Ve Ermeni sorunu bütün genel sorunlar içerisinde sadece bir tane sorun değil. Türkiye Cumhuriyeti yurttaşlığını, yurtseverliğini ve Türkiye'li kimliğini hele de hiç kimseye öyle bedavadan terk etme. Sen önce kendi kafanda vur. Ben kimim, ben neyim bu ülkede? Türkiye'de yaşayan bir Ermeni nedir? Önce onu vur. Yeri geldiğinde Türk'üm dedirteceksin bana, yeri geldiğinde Ermeni dönü diyeceksin bana. Yok öyle yağma. Ben Türkiye'liyim ve Türkiye Ermenisiyim.
When Agos published an article in 2004 suggesting that one of Turkey's national heroes, Sabiha Gökçen, the adopted daughter of Turkey's founding father and the country's first female fighter pilot, had Armenian roots, Hrant Dink became the target of an organized and systematic campaign on the part of the army, politicians, the media, the judiciary, and nationalist groups. He was openly threatened. Legal cases followed one after the next, as did convictions.
Benim üzerime gelinmesinin temel nedeni nedir? Özellikle devletin derinliğinin bana haddimi bildirme operasyonu var şu anda benim karşımda. Çünkü bana bunu kendileri söyledi. Genelkurmay yayınladığı bildiride bu haberi yayınlayan kişi ülkenin birliğine ve bütünlüğüne nifak sokmak. Ertesi gün münasip bir şekilde diğerlere götürüldüm ve sana haddini bildireceğiz dendi. O gün bugündür de ben 301'de Devam ediyorum, haddim bildirilmeye çalışılıyor.
In the middle of the day, on January 19th, 2007, Hrant Dink was shot twice from behind and assassinated as he entered the Agos building.
Hrant Dink menfur bir suikasta kurban gitmiştir.
Gazetesinin önünde yaşamını yitirdi.
Şu anda yaklaşık 1500-2000 kişilik bir kalabalık olduğunu tahmin ediyorum.
Most Turks are stripped.
There is conclusive evidence that the police, gendarmerie, and other groups knew of the plot to murder Hrant Dink beforehand. The legal proceedings related to the case began in 2007 and are still ongoing today. Yet to date, there has been no serious investigation or prosecution of those who made Hrant Dink a target, threatened him, or turned a blind eye to what was happening. The people responsible for his murder still have not been identified or punished for their crimes.
Yaşı kaç olursa olsun, 17 veya 27 olsun, katil kim olursa olsun, bir zamanlar bebek olduklarını biliyorum. Bir bebekten bir katil yaratan karanlığı sorgulamadan hiçbir şey yapılamaz kardeşlerim.
Dear guests, friends, and colleagues, I would like to welcome you to the 2024 Hrant Dink Memorial Lecture on Freedom of Expression and Human Rights. Before we start, I would like to share a few technical information with you. The conference will take place in English. Please click on the interpretation button below at the right-hand side of your screen with a world sign and choose Turkish for simultaneous translation. This session will also be recorded and broadcast live on YouTube. Herkese merhabalar, değerli misafirler, arkadaşlar ve meslektaşlarım. Başlamadan önce teknik bir bilgi sizle paylaşmak istiyorum. Konferansın dili İngilizce olacak. Türkçe simultane tercümeye ihtiyacı olanların ekranın sağ alt köşesinde bir dünya işareti göreceksiniz. Dünya işaretinde Türkçe'ye basmanız gerekiyor. Bu şekilde Türkçe tercümeyi duyabilirsiniz. I'm honored to have been given this opportunity to present Professor Shirin Seykali as our 70th distinguished guest this year. Shirin Seykali is an associate professor of history at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She is the director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the same university. She is the co-editor of various book series and journals, such as the Stanford Studies Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies and Culture series, co-editor of Cedeliye, and editor of Journal of Palestine Studies. She has written extensively on social, cultural, and intellectual history and political economy of Palestine and the wider Middle East. Her book, Men of Capital, Scarcity and Economy in Mandate Palestine, explores economy, territory, the home, and the body. Her forthcoming book, From Baltimore to Beirut, on the question of Palestine, tells a global history of capital, slavery, and dispossession. In her talk today, Professor Seykali will draw on 100 years of history to reflect on bearing witness to genocide, the gift and the burden of narration, and the relationship between history and the lived present. She will pose the question of what can the history of Palestine teach us about surviving catastrophe? These annual memorial lectures organized jointly by the History, Sociology, and Political Science and International Relations departments at Boğaziçi University, have taken place without interruption since 2008. They were initiated to commemorate the legacy of Hrant Dink, the founder and editor-in-chief of the bilingual Turkish-Armenian weekly newspaper Agos, and promote the values Hrant Dink stood for, namely equality, justice, freedom, and democracy for everyone against all odds. Our previous speakers at the Hrant Dink Memorial Lecture are committed, each in their own way, to contribute to struggles for equality and justice throughout the world. We have hosted such renowned speakers such as Sherzad Mojab, Eyal Weitzman, Hamid Bozaslan, Noam Chomsky, Angela Davis, Vandana Shiva, and Etienne Balibar, among many others. It has been 17 years that Hrant Dink was assassinated in broad daylight in front of his office building in Istanbul. The court case lasted for over a decade and finally concluded in March 2021, however, utterly failing to satisfy the demands for justice. Throughout these years, neither an effective investigation into the murder case was undertaken, nor the masterminds that were culpable behind the assassination plot were disclosed. The retrial has started in 2021 and it's still continuing. It remains to be seen whether the instigators of this crime will be adamantly pursued and the power of justice will prevail. Today, we are witnessing horrendous times. Yet another genocide is happening in front of our eyes in Gaza. The accelerating scale of unfathomable and indiscriminate violence threatening the lives of more than 2 million Palestinians, together with the destruction of the built environment, historical landscape, and civilian infrastructure of the Gaza Strip by the Israeli military with the support of US and Western states, is putting even the notion of Palestinian people under attack. Despite outrageous in its nature and scope, we know that the current war is just the most recent episode of a 100-year-long policy of settler colonialism in Palestine, namely the expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland, erase their claims and historical memory. Admiringly, though, there are courageous people struggling for justice around the world who speak truth to power against the silence and complicity of their states, university administrations, boards, and demand an end to the ongoing Israeli state violence against Palestinians and their states, diplomatic, military, and economic support. These pro-Palestinian protests in the US and European university campuses, however, are intimidated, repressed, and criminalized by the university administrations, while the suppression of speech on Palestine, growing securitization, and outright repression in the Western universities have reached levels not seen since the 1960s. In this context, I believe Shirin Sey Ali's work is as valuable as it is vital. Professor Sey Ali, as much as accomplished the historian's craft very seriously, she is also an inspiring critical archival studies scholar delving into knowledge production processes and the history of the present. In her fascinating book on the Man of Capital in British Mandate Palestine, she reflects on the historical erasures and silences in the colonial archives in order to decenter the dominant representations produced by the British colonial body about Palestinian economy, people, and land. In her work on the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, she asks the essential question of where the Arab archives are, and invites the reader to think about alternative ways of writing modern Palestinian history in the absence of official archives in a settler colonial context. How to write the history of 1967 war while, I quote, the archives are locked away in the walls of an ever-tightening and resilient Arab authoritarianism, or held hostage by the equally tight and resilient enterprise of Israeli militarization and dominance, end quote. She argues that the search for other sources is one crucial way to recover continuities and decolonize time. Hrant Dink did not pause in exposing myths of ethnocentric national projects and discourses of national superiority in Turkey, despite the numerous death threats he received. He stood up for his principles until the bitter end. We at Boğaziçi University also strive to keep this legacy alive by standing up for the principles of academic freedom and university autonomy, which has been undermined by the university administration for the last 3 years. We believe that the battle over free speech and academic freedom must not be allowed to metastasize. These principles are worth cherishing for the sake of a better world with justice, equality, and hope. In a piece Professor Shirin Seykali wrote for the 50th anniversary of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, she states, I quote, "Perhaps these lessons of the past can help us return not to a space or a time, but to hope as a political act, an act that must continue in the face of death and failure, an act that must suspend the expectation of change and victory, an act that sees despair not as the opposite of hope, but as its companion." With this, I would like to give the floor to Professor Shirin Seykali and thank her once again for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much, Seda. I'm so honored to be here and to be with all of you. That was such a humbling introduction. I want to thank in particular the departments of History, Political Science, International Relations, and Sociology at Boğaziçi for this invitation. I'm deeply honored and humbled to be with you as we commemorate the bravery and brilliance of Hrant Dink, who teaches us every day and long after his brutal departure just how political shaping knowledge is. I want to particularly thank Professor Altug, who I was very happy and honored to be graduate students with a long time ago, and it's really helpful to be sharing space together. I want to start by acknowledging the settler colonial realities in which I reside and with which I am complicit every day. And I want to express my gratitude and debt to the Chumash people and the Chumash land on which I live and work. And in that tradition, I want to share with you some images. One second. In that tradition, and following Indigenous scholar Leanne Simpson, I begin today with an image of Gaza as it once was. What we know today as the 141 square mile territory of the Gaza Strip is a product of the 1948 partition of Palestine. The city of Gaza is 4,000 years old. The broader Gaza Sanjak, or district, of which the city was a part, was a vibrant site of trade, commerce, and cultural production. This is an image of Gaza on October 6th. I share these images to mark our collective loss and mourning. I share them too to think about our experience of time in a present that, to build on Simpson's phrase, collapses the past into the future and imposes what Shreka Horvat has called an eternal present. Today, I want to think together about this age of generalized catastrophe from the standpoint of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I will ask if, in the face of this death and destruction, we can also think of the Gaza Strip and Palestine more broadly as a space of abundance, an abundance of lessons for living in catastrophe. I do this work as a child of a Palestinian man and woman who became, like 750,000 other Palestinians, refugees in 1948. I am a product and a scholar of what we call our ongoing Nakba, or catastrophe, that spans the 100 years of denial of Palestinian political rights and peoplehood. The earth has narrowed, said a Palestinian man in Rafah. He had taken refuge with his family in the Nasser hospital compound, what is now a mass burial site, a hospital that today is a reminder of horror. What does it mean for the earth to narrow? How does the earth narrow in a time of the eternal present, of reiterative grief and interminable mourning, what Christina Sharp would call being in the wake? What can this shifting space-time continuum teach us? Every day is the worst day, narrates Lara Alburno as she inventories the hunger, the maiming, and death suffered by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip since 7 October 2023. Some of us thought that the devastation and impoverishment brought on by 16 years of total siege, blockade, and repeated aggressions in and on Gaza could not get worse. Yet, as the history of Palestine and the Palestinians teaches us, things can always get worse. Every day, for now more than 6 months and counting, Israel's US-supplied arsenal has inflicted genocide. It is a betrayal to watch the shredding of our people. It is a betrayal to look away. We are today in the 217th day of relentless grieving. We grieve all life. We grieve the 1,139 Israelis that were killed on that fateful day of October 7. We grieve the now 34,905 Palestinians that Israel has killed since that day in the Gaza Strip. We grieve the 497 Palestinians that Israeli soldiers and settlers have killed since October 7 in the West Bank. We grieve the over 12,000 people missing under the rubble. A new acronym has taken shape in this genocide: the Wounded Child No Surviving Family. It is now estimated that at least 25,000 children have lost one or both parents in the Gaza Strip. The human toll is beyond staggering. The dead, the wounded, and the missing total over 4.5% of the Gaza Strip's 2.3 million people. The target of Israeli force and its US-supplied weapons, any honest observer of this war understands, is the civilian. Hamas combatants are the collateral damage. There are no safe zones in the Gaza Strip. Indeed, when the global calls for a ceasefire are finally heeded, Israeli and US and other Western citizens alike will have to come to terms with their support and funding of a genocide that inordinately targeted children, who make up an estimated 40% of the relentlessly climbing death toll. So far, mainstream media has confirmed 13,000 children killed by Israel. We know that the unfolding realities and the new forms of death they bring forth are equally relentless. It was back in December, on December 12, 2023, when the UNICEF spokesperson declared the perfect storm for disease has begun. Kidney failure and diarrhea caused by dehydration have quadrupled during this war. Hunger, a destroyed health sector, and the lack of water, refrigeration, and medical supplies has led to epidemics of dysentery, hepatitis, acute respiratory infections, and other contagious diseases. Disease, as one retired general recently explained, is an effective tool of war. Starvation has, as early as October 25th, been a weapon of war. We are now May 10th. Every single one of the 2.3 million people of the Gaza Strip is hungry. Famine, the UN has stated, has become an inevitability. We know what starvation does to the body. It feeds on its own stores of fat, moves on to muscles, erodes the heart, shuts down the immune system, attacks the brain, renders concentration impossible, and ends in slow and painful death. In this last month, we have witnessed during the month of Ramadan, Palestinians breaking their fast with plates of grass. We have witnessed emaciated, starved children dying of famine. We've been inundated with the sight of people desperate for food becoming targets for mass killing. We have witnessed hospital after hospital become sites of cold-blooded torture, massacre, and mass graves. We have learned that knowledge too is a target in Gaza. As we sit in our universities, this is an important reality to linger on. An estimated 70% of Gaza's schools have been reduced to rubble. Israel has obliterated Gaza's central archives, incinerating 150 years worth of archival materials. Every single one of Gaza's 12 universities, including Al-Azhar and the Islamic University of Gaza, are in ruins. 76 cultural centers, 3 theaters, 5 museums, 15 publishing houses and bookstores, 80 public libraries, over 200 heritage sites that dotted the Gaza Strip's cultural landscape are destroyed. The Israeli army bombed the Gaza Municipal Library and the Rashad al-Shawa Cultural Center into rubble. Thousands of documents and books have been burned. The buildings that housed the libraries and cultural centers were also precious spaces of communal learning and gathering. They too lie burnt to the ground. Genocide, we know, targets families in their entirety, attempting to erase the next generation by killing children in the thousands. The world has now learned of scholasticide or epistemicide, a policy that mandates the destruction of cultural and historical sites, libraries, bookstores, and the killing of educators. We know that making life unlivable and the Gaza Strip uninhabitable, a promise on which the Israelis delivered slowly over the past 16 years and at warp speed since October 7, is predicated on devastating these social infrastructures. As one Israeli general hoped, excuse me, Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. It is crucial to remember that this is as much a US as an Israeli war. Those rushed parachutes of US aid to starving Palestinians were a cynical spectacle. Since 1948, the US has gifted Israel more than $260 billion in mostly military aid. This does not include the additional packages of billions of dollars that Biden has pledged to Israel since November 2023. 2,000-pound US-made Mk-84 bunker busters have targeted Palestinians, with at least 208 of these devastating bombs dropped on the southern Gaza Strip alone. The US-made Joint Direct Attack munitions turns earth into liquid and renders instant death to anyone within 100 feet of the bomb's impact. In the last days of 2023, US outlets finally reported Israel's war on Palestine, quote, sits among the deadliest and most destructive in recent history. Over a period of less than 3 months, Israel's war of annihilation exceeded the destruction of the razing of Aleppo and the bombing of Mariupol, and was proportionally more intense than the Allied bombing of Germany during World War II. By the end of 2023, Israel had struck over 22,000 quote-unquote targets in the Gaza Strip, destroying in almost 75% of all structures of northern Gaza and a quarter of the buildings in the southern area of Khan Yunis, a city that would itself fall to ruins in March and April. The first 60 days of this war alone burned at least 150,000 tons of coal. Here we must think about environmental catastrophe as well. Experts have used satellite data to map the damage. This genocide has changed the land itself. The Gaza Strip is now a different color from space. It is a different texture. Those billions of dollars granted by the United States in 2023 alone contribute to the generalized state of climate catastrophe in which we all live. The waste of this war, from carbon to white phosphorus, will live on for generations in the soil, in the earth, and in our bodies. Israeli and US officials often speak of Gaza as an island, floating in isolation from the rest of Palestine and the rest of the world. Nothing could be further from the truth. Genocide in Gaza intensifies the age of global boiling in which we all live. 2023 was the hottest year on record. On November 17, 2023, and for the first time ever, global temperatures reached 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial rates. As everyone in this virtual space knows only too well, the last 2 years have given us multiple disasters in the shape of the devastating earthquakes you all experienced in Turkey. In 2023, we also saw the Hawaii wildfires that devastated Lahaina. It was also the year of extreme flooding in Rwanda and Congo, of a cyclone in Malawi, of devastating earthquakes in Morocco, in Afghanistan, in your own Turkey, in Syria, of earth-shattering storms in Libya. This list is by no means exhaustive, nor does it capture slower-moving catastrophes like the destruction of Alaska's Salmon River, a formerly pristine ecosystem now rusting because of oxidized iron materials in the water. In the face of these cascading disasters, it seems timely to revive the lessons of Walter Benjamin, a person also witnessing and writing in the midst of catastrophe, and his Angel of History. Perhaps we can look back at this chain of apparently isolated events as one single catastrophe. And in this age of catastrophe, Palestine is not an object for sympathy, fear, or even salvation. Palestine is a paradigm. It can teach us about our present condition of the permanent temporary. Let me now turn to some of those lessons. The first lesson goes back to the question of time, to the ongoing character of the catastrophe, to the narrowing of the earth in Gaza, and to the confines of the nation state. To restate the obvious, something that needs stating over and over again, the history of Palestine and Israel did not begin on October 7. What can explain the long and ongoing crisis in this wounded place? The answer to this question is the problem of Europe. During the 19th century, the category of race became a dominant way to establish civilizational hierarchies in a shifting world order. Anti-Semitism racialized Jewish people as biologically irredeemable and inassimilable other. This racialization paralleled and built on the racialization and violent exclusion of Black, brown, colonized, and indigenous bodies. The racialization of Jewish people in Europe would lead to industrial-scale genocide under Nazi rule, a genocide honed in Central Africa. As the recently departed president of Namibia, Hage Geingob, reminded us after the historic ICJ ruling and South Africa's brave and righteous case therein, the first genocide of the 20th century was the German killing of tens of thousands of Namibians between 1904 and 1908. It took Germany 107 years to recognize that genocide. And I'll pause here to say that, of course, in this commemoration of Hrant, Dink, even the word genocide and the commemoration of the Armenian genocide are acts of courage and bravery. Zionism was one response of many to the ubiquity of anti-Semitism in Europe and its prominent place in state ideologies. Zionism was a response to white supremacy. It was a hoped-for exit from the European racializing practices that Cedric Robinson and the Black radical tradition have traced, analyzed, and dismantled. But Zionism did not depart from the civilizational hierarchies from which it sought refuge. It refashioned those hierarchies. The limits of Zionism's self-definition as a liberation movement were immediately apparent to its primary, but not only victims, the Palestinians. There are plenty of other limits to Zionism I'd be happy to discuss, but for both European and Mizrahi Jewish people. But for now, I'll say that Zionism was both a response to, and crucially, an extension of European racializing ideas and practices. In 1917, British colonialism committed to a new vision for the land of Palestine without its people. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 became the legal foundation of the British colonial government's intent to facilitate a Jewish national home while safeguarding the civil and religious rights of quote-unquote non-Jewish people. At that time, Jewish people constituted only about 5 to 8% of the people living in Palestine. So the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate denied the very possibility of Palestinian peoplehood and political rights. That year, 1948, marked a fateful twin birth of the Israeli state and the ongoing Palestinian refugee condition, the inception of the ongoing Nakba. The Zionist movement established the state of Israel on the lands of the Palestinian people. That year, 750,000 Palestinians became stateless refugees and 150,000 were internally displaced in the new state of Israel. 70% of the people in the Gaza Strip at the start of 2023 were the refugees and descendants of 1948. We cannot be certain of the percentage of the survivors of the genocide today who are descendants of 1948, since we do not have access to all of the dead, and since birth certificates and all other documents of civil society and state bureaucracies have been destroyed. Palestinians in Gaza carry the long legacy of the denial of their peoplehood. After the 1967 war with Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, Israel occupied East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. More than 300,000 additional Palestinians, such as this one on your screen, became refugees. From 1967 to the present, Israel has overseen a military occupation of Palestinian land and life. For the last 75 years, Palestinians have suffered enclosure, dispossession, and fragmentation. They have been subject to the denial of self-determination as individuals and as a people. Since the ostensible peace process that began in 1993, Israeli settlers in territories occupied in 1967 have increased exponentially. Since 1967 to the present, an estimated 600,000 Israelis have settled in the West Bank. Their settlements and an elaborate system of bypass roads and checkpoints that weave them together have split the West Bank into isolated cantons along the inescapable partition or wall. This longue durée history is one of cumulative, repetitive, ongoing dispossession, as well as transgenerational trauma. This is an image from 2024, and this image haunts me particularly because within it you can see the transgenerational trauma of which I just spoke. So the first lesson Palestine and Israel offer us is to imagine freedom against and beyond the framework of national territorial sovereignty. We can see in this history that the problem, the nation state or its lack, cannot also be the solution. Here we can turn to a lesson of Indigenous studies to ask not who the land belongs to, but to insist that we belong to the land. A second lesson is to reject hierarchies of suffering and to embrace radical empathy. The history of the genocide of the Jewish people in Europe, known as the Holocaust or the Shoah, which means catastrophe in Hebrew, and the history of the dispossession of the Palestinians in 1948, that begins in 1948 and continues to the present, known as the Nakba, catastrophe in Arabic, are often posed as oppositional. They are not oppositional. The Shoah and the Nakba must be held together. That is not to say that they are similar or comparable. That would be shallow and ahistorical. My claim is different. Engaging the significance of the Shoah and the Nakba together reveals the centrality of catastrophe in Jewish and Palestinian histories. In the last sentence, I used Jewish and not Israeli. This brings me to a third lesson. Language is itself a product of history. The terms we use to understand this history are themselves objects we have to dismantle on two levels. On the first level, it is important to challenge how pundits discuss this history as one of quote unquote two sides. This depiction flattens Israelis and Palestinians into homogenous and mutually exclusive categories. There are more than two sides. There are internal divisions and differences among and between Israelis and Palestinians. Most importantly, the two sides narrative equates the Israeli state with the Palestinian people. Such an equation elides the power differential between a state and the people it colonizes and occupies. On a second level, there are several pairings that appear synonymous or antonymous in this history. One such pairing is Jewish and Zionist. Jewish and Zionist are not synonymous. Judaism is the world's first Abrahamic monotheistic religion. It is 4,000 years old. Zionism is a political nationalist movement that began in the late 19th century. Not all Jewish people are Zionists. Not all Zionists are Jewish. Similarly, Arabs and Jews are not antonyms. Indeed, the majority of Jewish people lived under Arab or Muslim rule until the 12th century, when many began migrating to Europe. And until the 1950s, there were substantial numbers of Arab Jewish people who lived throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, from Morocco to Iraq. It was Zionism and Arab nationalism that made the category of the Arab Jew impossible. Arab and Jewish became national political markers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The seemingly oppositional relationship between Arab and Jewish did not cause the Zionist-Palestinian conflict. The Zionist-Palestinian conflict produced this opposition. Palestine is a site of catastrophe. It was also a site of refuge. After all, survivors of two of the largest genocides of the 20th century, the Armenian genocide and the Shoah, found refuge in Palestine. Perhaps, too, this is a lesson and an invitation to think of Palestine as a refuge. To end, I want to return to the tortured present. Today, once again, is the 217th day of a fall, a winter, and now a spring that has lasted a lifetime. Every single person in Gaza is hungry. Famine is the new order of the day. A child dies every 2 minutes. As we witness this ongoing, escalating, reiterative Nakba, let us listen to the abundant lessons Palestine teaches us. We cannot await a secular salvation or a messianic apocalypse in Palestine or on earth. We are in the apocalypse. Palestine reminds us, in the words of Jody Bird, that the post has not yet arrived. There is no post-colonial, post-racial, or post-Zionist. And as we struggle with this condition of the permanent temporary and of a present suspended in time, we learn from the Palestinians who make life amidst the certainty of death. Ever since this war started, I've been gathering images and videos of bakers, tea makers, and launderers. In their struggle for the basics of life, we find so much else: confidence, courage, humor, cunning, and steadfastness. I want to show you one of these young people who have inspired me in these very dark days.
صلاة النبي شو اسمك؟ رهب شاطرة رهب في غسل الغسيل من جديد بتغسلي ولا من زمان؟ رهب عشت طفولتك عشت طفولتك احكي لي عن طفولتك.
So for the people who don't know Arabic, this is to me a really striking video because the interviewer is asking this young girl, he's saying to her, you're such a good girl. You're doing the laundry. Have you always done the laundry? And she says, yes. And he says, okay, well, tell us, did you have a childhood? She says, yes. And he said, well, did you live your childhood? And she says, yes. And he said, well, tell us about your childhood. And she's kind of like, what does this guy want? And I think this young girl, Rahaf, with her unshakable smile, her insistence on her childhood, her determined rejection of despair, teaches us that she lives in Palestine and that it lives in her. Over and over, I turn to the storytellers. I have found much refuge in Deborah Cohen's study of the history of seismology. Cohen guides us to return to the role of tradition, training, and habit in the cultivation of response to catastrophe. Her reading of Benjamin's 1931 radio broadcast, The Lisbon Earthquake, which was a canonical moment of catastrophic rupture in Western European traditions. She traces a way out of the philosopher's later distinction between the traditional and the modern, namely his mourning of the passing of the oral tradition in his essay, The Storyteller. In the 19th century and well into the 20th, Cohen finds, scientific descriptions of earthquakes were synthesized from everyday people's eyewitness accounts. The salience of what seismologists refer to today as felt reports shows us that history is not distinct from subjective impressions. It is constituted by it. We must listen for the stories in the information and for the information in the stories. We must listen to ordinary people narrating extraordinary things. It is these people who have crafted the Palestinian tradition of storytelling, not as a way to reflect history, but to shape it. As the generations pass, Rosemary Saïd reminds us, telling our stories is a way of living despite catastrophe, of perceiving the world and acting towards it. Through these acts towards the world, Palestinians teach us to exceed exclusion from the human, to hold tightly to our visions of the possible, and to shape and reshape life, even amidst the certainty of death. And here I want to give the last word to one of my favorite storytellers in the Gaza Strip today, Lama Jamous.
أنا أبو جاموس. أول ما صرت الحرب حبيت إنه أمسك الكاميرا وأكون صحفية عشان أوصل صوت أطفال فلسطين للعالم. إحنا بنحس بالخوف بنضل نجرب مهاراتنا. أنا على صفحتي الانستغرام بحب إنه أنشر الأخبار وبحب إنه أنا الفيديوهات اللي بصير بغزة نفسي إنه يوقف الحرب وأضل ألعب مع صحباتي وألعب ببيتي وأكون مرتاحة مش كل مرة يقولوا لنا حرب حروب. أنا نفسي تكون غزة زي زمان ونفسي تكون غزة فيها مسكنات معمرة وتكون في مباني معمرة كمان ودور. أنا بحب إنه يكون عندي متابعين وأحب إنه يوصل صوتي للعالم يسمعوني وأنا كمان بدي أسمعهم وشغل قتل الحرب على خير.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shireen, for this very powerful, thought-provoking, and inspiring talk. I wish you were with us. I wish it was an in-person talk so that we would pose you our questions. We would have the chance to talk in more detail. But thank you very, very much for this fantastic talk. And as has been the tradition in Boğaziçi University's Hrant Dink Memorial Lectures, I would now like to give the floor to Raquel Dink, who also graciously joined us this year as well. Raquel Hanım, buyurun.
Merhabalar herkese. Ne diyeyim? Zor anlardan geçiyoruz gerçekten. Öncelikle Boğaziçi Üniversitesi Siyaset Bilimi ve Uluslararası İlişkiler, Sosyoloji ve Tarih bölümleri değerli hocalarına, büyük fedakarlıklarla düzenledikleri bu çok önemli konferansı için yürekten teşekkür ediyorum. Bu vesileyle tekrar bir arada olmak, sevgimizi paylaşmak, inanıyorum ki hepimiz için hayatın değerli anlarından biridir. Çok değerli konuşmacı Şirin Seykali'nin Filistin'in 100 yıllık gerçeğiyle bizi yüz yüze getiren konuşması, tarihe ve zihnimize bıraktığı izler için kendisine teşekkür ediyorum. İnsanlık maalesef geçmişteki kötülüklerden ders almak yerine kötülüğü çoğaltarak yapmaya devam ediyor. Maalesef hala öğrenemedi kötülüğün aletleri olarak, kötülüğe kötülük katarak, günahı çoğaltarak ancak kendi sonunu getiriyor, hazırlıyor. Egemenler, devlet yöneticileri tarih boyunca silaha sarıldılar. Toplulukları öldürdüler, alçalttılar, aşağıladılar. Dünyayı, doğayı, çevreyi ve kendilerini hep yok ediyorlar. Öldüren, öldürmeyle zevkleniyor. Doyum da yok. Pek çok diğer devletler ise onlara seyirci. Ölenlerin, evsiz, yurtsuz kalanların perişanlığı sayıya gelmez. Açlığın, kıtlığın olması, çocuk, kadın, dediğiniz gibi öksüz, ailesiz kalan çocukların, kadın ve bebeklerin ölümü kimin umurunda bir avuç insanın dışında. İsa Mesih Yeruşalim'e girerken son Yeruşalim'e girişinde kente yaklaştı ve kenti görünce ağladı. Ey Yeruşalim, keşke bugün esenliğe giden yolu bilseydin dedi. Yaşama destek vermeden esenlik nasıl olsun? Yaşama destek vermemenin sonucu kargaşa, kaos, savaş, ölüm, kıtlık, yoksulluk, yoksunluk maalesef. Hrant'ın terörün gücü ve gücün terörü diye tanımlayarak aklımıza kazıdığı sarmalda yaşarken bizler, barış söyleminden ne pahasına olursa olsun vazgeçmiyoruz. Bu gidişatı durduracak tek çözümün bir arada yaşamı öğrenmek olduğunu keşke anlasak. Keşke anlasak. Hepinize tekrar çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Teşekkürler Raquel Hanım. Thank you. Thank you again, Professor Seykali. Thank you, Raquel Hanım. Initially, we used to present our speakers with a plaque, but as we all know, plaques usually get hoarded in cupboards and are a waste of precious natural resources. So we came up with another idea. We plant a tree, a Judas tree, on campus. That tree then embodies both the memory of Hrant Dink and our gratitude to our guest lecturer, Şirin Seykali. Thank you very much. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the organization committee for contributing to making the lecture possible, and to our interpreters, Sena Bayraktar and Ufuk Yılmaz, for the excellent work they did. Thank you very much all.